Hey there, Python pioneers, and welcome to another episode. In this episode, we're going to take a look at working with files in Python. You can actually control the files on your computer with code, and it's really useful. And I think it fits really well with the series here and automate the boring stuff. You might find that in your day-to-day life, you are working with files all the time. Maybe you're organizing your Word documents for an English class, or your notes for one of your history classes. Or maybe you're just a nerd like me and you like to organize your files anyways. Maybe you want to write a program that creates files and saves information in them. Maybe you want your Python program to save the state of variables. So whatever value is in a variable, you want to save that into a file. That way the next time you run your Python program, it remembers where you left off. All of these things and more are what we're going to talk about in the next few videos. So I hope you get some value out of that. Now you probably are wondering, why are we on a Google screen, or a Bing screen in this case? We are looking at Google Colab. So the next few lessons I am going to be in Google Colab. I think it's a little bit better for walking through code like we have been doing, so I hope that you enjoy that method of delivery a little bit more. Now I just wanted to show you, this is what Google Colab is. It's right here, collab.research.google.com. It's free to use, and it's basically a cloud version of something called Jupyter Notebooks. Very useful, very cool. You don't need it to follow along though. You can continue writing your code in Mu, and that will be just fine. I wanted you to know what I was using though, in case you want to go and use it yourself. So without further ado, let's jump on over and look at working with files. So we have several things that we're going to go through, and these will be in different videos. But for the first video, we're going to do a quick crash course on classes, and we're going to look at something called the pathlib module. So let's go ahead and open up the crash course on classes, and I've got a few things in here to help us get started. So what is a class, right? We really haven't talked about it that much, but you've already been using them. So it's a concept that I want you to understand, because it's going to be helpful as we start talking about some of the class or specific classes that you're going to use while working with files. So what is a class, and what are some of the things we can do with it, right? Let's look at the string. We've worked with string in many different cases leading up to this lesson, right? So the string has a class constructor, and you're probably thinking, what in tarnation is a class constructor? That sounds confusing. It's actually pretty straightforward. So the class constructor just creates an instance of that class. So when you call the string method, right, we learned about that a long time ago, str and the parentheses, and you pass in a value, it creates a string. Now, normally when you say, my variable blah, blah, blah equals, and you put it in quotes, behind the scenes, the string class constructor runs to create that string. Now, all this still is like, what's the point though, right? Like, it's just a string, it's just characters. Now think about when you have a string variable, you can run methods on it, right? Like you can run your variable name that's a string, right? Like say it's my var. You can say my var dot lower and run that method. You can do that because the variable is an instance of the string class. Okay? So when you create a string, you call a constructor. that creates and returns an instance of the string class. A string object is another way to call it. You can then call the string instance methods on your new value. Instance methods are special class functions you can only use on the instance of a class, right? So instance methods are things like lower, upper, those special methods like right here that you can only type that on a string variable, right? You can't type that on an integer variable. It won't know what you're talking about because an integer variable is not an instance of the string class. So instance methods are available to instances of certain classes. In this case, the string variable has several instance methods that are available to it. Okay, and we haven't really worked with date, but I wanted to show you because it's something we can all relate to. So there is a library, a module that you can import called datetime. And from that module, you can import date. So date is a class, just like string. And you can create date objects that represent a certain date, right? Straightforward. Think of it, instead of a string, now you can notice 3/24/2024 is a date, March 24th, 2024. And I can create and represent that date using my date class. Now, just like with the string, when I use this date constructor, I'm creating an instance of the date class that gets returned here and assigned to the myDate variable, right? And then myDate is now a instance of the date class. I can call functions, they're functions, but we call them instance methods. A method is a special function, right? That you can only call on a class. Well, to break that down further, there's instance methods and there's class methods. So instance methods, like we talked about on the string, are methods that are available to the instance that you created of a class. So in this case, we created myDate as an instance of the class, and we can call the isOweekday. Doesn't really matter if you know about that instance method or not. It's just interesting to know, like if I run that and I check what day of the week is 3/24/2024, well, that falls on a Sunday, okay? And so it returns 7 as the integer to tell us, hey, that's a Sunday. So you can use this instance method to check what day of the week any date falls on. So kind of useful, could be useful depending on what you're writing. But that's an instance method, right? Because we use that dot on the variable on the instance of the date class, that date object. We have to put a period at the end of the date object to use the instance method. Now I'm using all these crazy words and it probably makes it sound more confusing, but this is the correct terminology for you to understand what you're actually doing when you're working on these variables and calling functions on them. You're calling these special methods on variables, like on the string and on date objects. So sometimes some classes will have class methods. So an instance method, you call on an instance of the object, of the class. So it's an object that is that class, right? It's an object of that class. Now a class method is called on the class itself rather than on an instance. So what does that mean, right? So the date class has a method named today. So notice I'm calling the method today on the class itself. I didn't create a variable and assign a date object to it. I literally just typed out the class name and called a method. Not every class has class methods, but some classes do, right? Because up here, I imported the date class, and I don't have a date variable, but I can call date today, and that's a method that's available to me. It's a class method. And I just want you to notice that class methods are called on the class themselves, not on an instance of the class. If I were to try to say my date dot today, that wouldn't work because today is a instance, it's a class method, sorry. So I wanted to talk about these terminologies because now we're going to jump in and actually look at the pathlib module. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we jump in there. Thanks.